This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I see it all the time. Attention span is dwindling. For many people, they literally don't have attention span. They're zombies walking around looking for the next piece of food to stuff in their mouth. Modern society, no attention span. This is it. We all know it. In fact, 47 seconds, that's about the average time someone will stay focused on a screen before shifting their attention. Or here's another one. If you are doing something and you get interrupted, it can take 25 minutes to get back to the same mindset that you were before you were interrupted. But as you know with this podcast, there are people out there who have developed ways around these modern problems that we all face. My guest today is Gloria Mark from the University of California, and she writes about finding our focus and fighting distraction in the modern age. I don't care who you are. We're all facing the same damn issue. And the moment we can figure it out, the moment life becomes a little more pleasant. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my guest today, Gloria Mark, and figure out how we can bring back some attention. I hope you enjoy this conversation. You are right in the square in the crosshairs for a topic that I don't think anybody can avoid. They can avoid if they want to with short attention span. They can go the other direction. But you're square in a topic that affects everyone. And I think what's so interesting, here I am, I'm Gen X guy. So essentially I've had half my life pre-internet and half my life post-internet. You really have to think about this, though, from the standpoint when it comes to attention span and technology and everything. The difference between generations is going to be radically different. How have you handled that in your analysis, or is my setup wrong?
No, I think you're right. But I think that older generations who've straddled both pre and post-internet worlds, we see the world very differently because we understand what life was like before the internet. It gives us a very different perspective when we think about the internet. Younger generations haven't had that experience. They've only experienced the internet. They've grown up with it. It's a very different perspective on the world. And I say the world because we're so immersed in digital media. I mean, people spend a good portion of their lives on computers and phones. And so it really is a kind of immersion. And so they really have a very different perspective of the world.
You know, but it starts to get hazy, though. I'm sure it does for you, too. That memory of, let's say, I guess, the American Online discs and me having email was probably spring of 1994. Netscape went public in the summer of 95. The race was on, but that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
You know?
It was definitely a long time ago, and it crept up on us so fast. It just came on lightning speed and changed our behaviors and changed the world.
Let me use an example, which is, I don't think it's controversial. I think it's maybe something that a lot of people are doing, whether they're frankly in a relationship or not in a relationship. And I don't use TikTok. I've not become a TikTok user, but I will still get on Facebook. I've stopped posting on Facebook as much. I think these days I'm posting, I don't know where I'm posting more, Twitter and my own stuff, doing the podcast. But I find one of the interesting things that's developed, and I'm a guy and I'm heterosexual. If I open up Facebook, they're feeding me short videos. And I'm not clicking on anything unusual to get these short videos that I know of. I'm not some guy off doing unusual stuff, but the numbers of short videos that are showing me ladies, usually pretty ladies and dressed in provocative ways and stuff. It pauses me because it's addictive. I'll look for a second, and then you look for a second more, and everything just keeps going in rapid fire. Now, okay, I start with this example from a guy's standpoint, but that mindset is applying on every topic, every subject. And where does it leave me when it's done? What is happening to me when that's over?
You're leaving digital traces. Every time we go on the internet, we leave a digital trace. The sites we visit, we make comments, we make posts, and all of these digital traces are collected. Sales and marketing teams can get a pretty good idea of what your personality is like. And they know how to target your very basic emotions and instincts and know how to lure your attention. It's happening to all of us, unless you stay off the internet.
On whatever topic it happens to be. I use the example of cute ladies, but it's whatever topic.
Exactly. I use an example in my book of being pursued by a pair of boots. This was a real experience that happened to me. I was shopping for boots online. And then every time I went online, irrespective of whatever website I was on, those boots were following me. I couldn't get rid of them. It's such a good metaphor, boots chasing me around the internet. It's that way with all kinds of topics. I have a good friend. She bought gifts for her grandchildren. And then all of a sudden she gets targeted with all kinds of baby things. So there's this perception that she must be a young mother and interested in baby products.
It is amazing, the targeting. Let me take it to attention, and I'll use me as an example, and you can analyze, comment, and maybe it's just a good jumping off point. So as somebody who put up a website in 1996, essentially a blog that eventually turned into 8 books, eventually has turned into 1,000+ podcast episodes. I find myself as somebody who can put the distractions away, who can focus and get that thing done. However, I do feel guilty so much of the time where I feel like I do lose my attention. I'm caught by, for example, I just mentioned the videos on Facebook or whatnot. And I guess the reason I bring that up is I can think, okay, I've got 2 nephews and a niece that are essentially teenagers. I guess one's 20, all in that range, 2 in college, 1 in high school. And I think, will they have, I mean, there's not going to be any lack of IQ. They're smart kids. Because of distraction and because of short attention span, will they have the ability to take on those types of projects? And would I have had the ability to do it if I would have grown up as they are growing up now?
There are individual differences. There are some people who were dealt a good deck of cards when they were born, and they have good self-regulation skills. They're highly conscientious. They score very low in impulsivity. These are the kinds of personality traits that are consistent with somebody who has really good powers of focus. Unfortunately, not so many people are born so lucky, but even if you weren't born with a good set of cards, you can change. There's things that people can do. It has to do with whether your niece and nephew, do they have the motivation that they want to be able to learn how to focus better? Or are they happy going on social media, news sites, shopping sites, and so on?
Given that they don't have the memory that you and I have of pre-internet, and they're in it 24/7, TikTok 24/7, are the adults that own these machines and these systems and these platforms that these younger people are on, are we somewhat responsible for, even if they have, let's say, the good fortune to have been born with some of the self-regulation that you state, even somebody that's born with that good regulation, are the older people that own these platforms unduly influencing the younger people when it comes to attention?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. And I do think that they are responsible. There does need to be policy and regulation at a societal level to curb that influence. It's not fair. It's not fair for young people because the internet is just so tempting. and there's peer influence. I've studied young people and their lives on the internet, and they explained to me that they would love to be able to not spend so much time, but they feel imprisoned because their friends are on the internet and social media, and they have to keep up with what's going on. And if they stop, if they pull out, they'll be left out. They feel that they'll be ostracized. There's so much peer pressure going on. Back to your original point, the people who run these companies, the sales and marketing teams, PhDs who are really good at understanding people's digital behavior and how to target advertisements and notifications for people. Yes, they are responsible.
It's an interesting analysis that have to keep up. When I first got to Asia 10 years ago, okay, I said to myself, well, I'm not going back to San Diego. I like it here. This is very cool. This is nice. But I think what I started to learn over time is that as an outsider, if I could just fit in a little, even if I don't have great language skills, and it's a country with very nice people, then I don't have to keep up in the way that I might have had to keep up in America. It's weird in the sense that not planned, but just pull myself out of that having to keep up. I don't feel that need or desire in a, quote, foreign place. An interesting side tangent. I can imagine that for young people, when everyone is online, when your friends are online and everyone's doing something, if you pull out and you don't do that, what are your options? What are your life options if you're not in the system with everyone else that you know doing the same thing that they're doing? What are your options?
It's the peer influence that reinforces all the targeting that's going after young people. It's coming at them from different directions. It's coming at them from the technological system itself. It's also coming at them laterally from their friends, helping reinforce their behavior. And then, of course, our individual natures that compel us to stick with the internet. For example, we're social beings. We have social natures. There's certain social pressures that we succumb to that keep us glued to the internet.
Let's take it to perhaps one of the more important aspects of your work and things that you've studied and dived into in the lab and whatnot, interruptions. And this gets back to maybe me bringing up earlier, writing books and whatnot. And here you've done all kinds of research books yourself. So you have a system where you can keep yourself from being interrupted to fulfill and complete a very long task that requires a lot of depth. I have a sneaky suspicion that people that are not pursuing that kind of endeavor in their life, you can probably go all day and just be interrupted all day and not even know that it's abnormal. You're just going from one interruption to another.
Oh, sure. It's having a lack of agency. I once had a participant in one of my studies, and he said that his life is dictated by the pace of electrons. And what he meant was that he just felt he had no agency at all when he was on his computer. He said he lets the sound of the bells and the pop-ups rule his life. It's a bit extreme.
Is that normal?
I would say it's normal for a lot of people. I've heard variations of these kinds of comments from people. It's representative of a lack of agency. And so what we need to do is we need to pull back and learn how we can be on top of it, how we can have agency, how we can control how we behave on the internet rather than having the internet being controlling us.
So my generation, your generation, if somebody would have stood in the town square and screamed crazy things about some megalomania type individual from history, we would have all been like, oh, look at the nut job in the town square screaming. And I could still think to the Blues Brothers movies from 1980, and Jake and Elwood drive their car and they drive a bunch of, quote, Illinois Nazis off the bridge into the water. There seemed to be less worry about things being said. Again, back to this divide with the internet, and here you are, you're in the college environment. It seems like younger folks are much more worried about thoughts and ideas that don't immediately resonate with them. And instead of just saying, oh, look at that idiot, I could care less what he says, there's a desire to shut down. I'm just going through your world and I'm wondering, is this all connected in some way?
I guess at some level, we can say it's all connected.
The anxiety of the information. Okay, so if I'm a young person today, like the person you just mentioned, bells and pop-ups and stuff, it's like all that information constantly coming at you, causing so much anxiety that something pops up and then everybody is focused on some issue. And then we have to rally around that issue and feel something about it. Whereas if you didn't have that 40 years ago, you watched the Blues Brothers movie and you just laughed. You're like, oh, look at those idiots, Illinois Nazis, whatever. It seems like the technology has taken our attention span and also made it shorter, but focused it in ways where I can see, where does all the anxiety come from? Where does the exhaustion come from? Trying to follow every bit of information, controversial or not, is just tiring.
It's absolutely tiring. Nobody wants to look ill-informed. If you're in your office, you're in a student environment, everyone wants to appear like they're on top of it. And so you have to keep up with the information. And information is coming at us at lightning speed. So, of course, it's creating anxiety. It's called technostress. It's a term for stress that's particularly connected to using technology. We're experiencing just unprecedented levels of technostress. It's trying to consume all this information, producing information. The cycle is moving so fast that it's just wearing us out.
We're going to eventually move to some of your ideas on solutions. I'm just taking you through and let you and I describe some of what we see. One of the things that's an interesting thought, I'm sure maybe you've heard about this before. I had a guest in this podcast, Gabriel. I want to say he was a professor at Notre Dame. I forget his last name, but he had studied the idea, and this drives me crazy because I see it happen to me, that if you're in a house and you're walking around or whatnot, you have a great thought and you walk through a door, you can forget the idea. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah.
This makes me think of your work too. It's like another version of interruption and distraction and multitasking all tied into. And I sometimes hear this with singers. Singers will say they'll carry around a notepad. Famous singers, if you listen to when they talk about how they make their songs, they'll carry on a physical notepad and they write everything down because they're afraid to forget it. I heard the filmmaker David Lynch say this. I have to write things down. And he had a great interview where he said, there's been 3 times in my life where I lost 3 great ideas that probably would have changed my life. And I don't know what they were. I forgot them. But he just remembered there was 3 that he had lost. Again, this feels like it ties into your world too, where we keep jumping around without paying attention.
It's not just young people that pull themselves out. It's the everyday knowledge worker. Because for any person to pull themselves out, to do a digital detox, to spend some time off the internet, they are only penalizing themselves because they're missing out on workplace communications, colleague communications. They're not producing information. Other people, of course, have their eyes on everyone else's output. We're all tied up into this interconnected web of relationships on the internet that it's just nearly impossible to pull yourself out.
47 seconds?
That's it. 47 seconds is the average attention span that a person has on a screen, computer, and phone.
And what happens at the end of 47 seconds? You flip to the next TikTok video. What's happening to us?
It's an average. So that means that sometimes you spend longer. You're watching a TikTok video. Sometimes it's just rapid switching. People, when they surf the internet, they're just spending a few seconds on each site. It's associated with boredom. Think of it flipping channels on the remote. 47 seconds, you cannot accomplish very much. You can't really do any kind of deep thinking in 47 seconds. I can barely get myself oriented to a new topic in 47 seconds. And then imagine that people have a significant shift of attention after that.
One of the things that I theorize, and having, again, started an online business in 1996, watching the .com era, watching what's happened in the last 22 years, not to go too far into my world, but to watch, for example, the Federal Reserve giving us low interest rates for a decade plus. And you start to see a situation where maybe a lot of Americans, as an example, start to feel like, man, I'm pretty successful. I've got the big house on the hill. I've got the big paying job. I've got this. I've got that. And then all of a sudden, the economy, as we can all see right now, is starting to change with inflation and interest rates going up. And I sometimes wonder if the era that we've especially seen in the last decade, where attention spans have just dropped, I guess perhaps time it to the Facebook launch, I wonder if things might change if times get hard, if maybe people will say, well, I don't have time for this now. I got to pay the electricity bill. I got to do this. I got to do that. I wonder if hard times could be a tonic to the world that we've been living in.
It's hard to know because it can work the other way as well. Hard times can make people want to escape and want to go to sites that are low stress. They might seek relief. So go to TikTok or go to Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. Just take a break from real life.
Fair point on devil's advocate. Give me your perspective on multitasking. I think most people would probably think, oh, I'm a multitasker. I can do everything. I can manage everything. Now, me personally, I know that's not how it works, but give your perspective from the lab on multitasking.
First, let me explain what multitasking is not, because a lot of people have a misperception of multitasking. It's not literally doing two things at the same time. What it is switching attention and switching activities back and forth. You might switch among two things or 10 things, but your attention is not spent for long periods of time on any one task. There's two kinds of preferences that people have. Some people prefer to do what's called polychronic work, and that's switching your attention. That's working on 5, 6, 10 different tasks within the same period of time and then switching their attention between them. Other people, and actually most people, something like 80% of people, prefer to do what's called monochronic work. And that's working on one task through to completion before you switch and do something else. I prefer monochronic work. But here's the kicker. We live in a world that's polychronic. If you're a knowledge worker, chances are you've got to just adapt to the demands of the work environment. And that means you're being delegated work, you're answering queries from your colleagues, someone pops into your office. And so you're in a polychronic environment, but you've got this monochronic preference. And so think of it like we're square pegs and jammed in round holes, and it's just not fitting.
It's got to be causing a decent amount of trauma.
It is. So that's another point. A lot of people think I can do more when I multitask, but people actually do less. And multitasking has consistently been associated with stress. It's been associated with higher blood pressure, with the release of a particular hormone that's associated with stress. Subjectively, people report feeling more stressed when they're multitasking. When you take an objective measure of heart rate, which is called heart rate variability, that measure shows also that people are significantly more stressed when they multitask. So all around, it's not good for our mental health or our physical health.
What percentage of people, and you might not know this, an estimate's fine or a guesstimate, what percentage of people do you think when they go to sleep at night and they put their phone down, that their phone is left on with alerts that can wake them up?
I think there actually is a study that looked at this, and I can't recall what that figure is. It's a good proportion.
Do you think it's north of 50%?
I am not sure I would say 50%, probably less than 50%, but it also depends on the person's work role. If we're talking about knowledge workers, my guess is close to 50%. But of course, think of artists or people who work housewives or maybe small business owners. Maybe for them, it's not so much.
Can someone ring you at night when you're asleep and wake you up?
So me personally, do you mean?
I'm curious, yes.
Yeah, it's happened.
But that's your choice. I'm the opposite. I've decided, and I've been doing this for a long time. Actually, I've not carried a phone that can ring for over a decade. I just turn it all off. But I definitely cannot be woken up by my iPhone while I'm sleeping. It's all off.
I'll tell you that most of the times that that's happened, it's because of time zone differences. And people got the time zones screwed up. Somehow they thought, oh, I must be in their time zone, wherever they are. So that's the main reason why that happens. I'm in academia, and so usually I don't expect.
You sleep good.
Well, no, I don't. I really don't. Students know that they should not be calling me during the night, and neither do my colleagues.
Before I take it back to the intensity of speaking about attention, can we take a step back and talk about the benefits of doing nothing? For me, I know, gosh, as somebody who would write or create, when I have that time, whether it's on a walk or just sitting there like a bump on a log, if doing nothing is where almost every great idea I've had has come from. It doesn't come when I'm focused on some piece of digital content that somebody else created. Can you speak to your feelings about the benefits of doing nothing, being detached?
I wouldn't call it doing nothing. I would call it rather doing something where your mind is lightly engaged. Einstein claims that he came up with the idea of relativity theory while he was playing his violin. Wittgenstein said that he had his best ideas when he was peeling potatoes. The great poet and writer Maya Angelou had what she called big mind and little mind. I love this idea. I just love it. So her big mind was when she did really deep thinking, and that's when she produced her great work. But she always pulled back and she engaged what she called little mind. And little mind was playing crossword puzzles, playing silly games. It kept her mind engaged. And what was happening was that her great ideas were incubating. When we're pulling back, it gives our great ideas a chance to kind of gel and formulate. We're still keeping our minds engaged lightly, but we're also allowing our attentional resources to replenish. It's really important to have both deeply involved engagement, but also to be able to pull back and have this very light, easy engagement.
And that takes effort, though. People have to try that. I'm not sure, given all the different types of professions and endeavors that people pursue, maybe they don't have to do that in their life, but trying that is an amazing experience that when you get into that habit of, even if you're just creating something for your own personal use, if I didn't have it, I'd go crazy. As you observe college campuses today, in which you get a chance to do, and students, are the types of classes and the way teachers teach, has this changed in a way to where it's not helping to help us with our attention? Meaning, is the way that a college campus, the way the classes are administered today, the always connected, always on, and perhaps even the way many teachers teach their subjects, has that changed significantly in the last 20 to 30 years to where it makes it tougher, gives you the opportunity to write this great book, but as it makes it tougher on the average student?
I think some people are just teaching traditional ways that have always happened where they're giving lectures. What we're seeing more and more are innovations like the flipped classroom. This is where students do the readings and the lecture work, and then they come to class, and that's where they have discussions. And I think a lot of teaching is moving toward more multimedia approaches where they're trying to break up a lecture. So it's not just a talking head in front of the room, but you mix the lecture with video and audio and group discussions. And I think that students profit a lot more from that kind of variation. You can say that maybe we're catering to students' short attention spans. Maybe students are losing the ability to be able to engage for 50 minutes listening to a lecture because we're not giving them the opportunity. We're mixing things up. But I think overall, students are happier now to have this kind of mix of different kinds of approaches in teaching.
So for all of us, whether it's student, teacher, outside individual like me, the general public, you and I have gone over a lot of different topics, and people listening can imagine all kinds of other directions that they could go when they start to imagine the negative aspects of short attention, what's happening with multitasking. Let's start to unpack some ways to where people can walk away from our conversation today with at least a step forward before they jump into your book, some positive ways where they can start to take a technique or an understanding to improve some of the areas that you and I have been talking about that could be described as negative.
One of the first things that people can do is to understand your own personal rhythm of attentional capacity. And let me explain what I mean by that. Everybody has a limited attentional capacity. When we concentrate or do hard work for an extended period of time, that capacity drains. Or when we're switching our attention rapidly and we're trying to check email and then we're trying to go to Slack and write something and do PowerPoint, think of it like your tank of attentional resources. That's just draining really, really fast. And so it's really important for people to understand their rhythms of when they're at their peak capacity and when they're not. And I say rhythms because what I found in my research is that there are rhythms of attention. People have a greater capacity and less capacity. It's tied to a number of things. It's tied, of course, to the things you're doing. It's tied to a person's what's called a chronotype. And a chronotype, think of it as a biological rhythm. You can be a late type, where you tend to sleep late and you don't hit your stride until maybe 2:00 in the afternoon. You could be an early type, where you wake up at 5 a.m. and by 6 a.m. you're at your peak. People have these individual chronotypes, and that also affects their rhythms. And of course, as we go through the day, the more time that you're awake, of course, your attentional capacity drains simply from the fact that you had this great night of sleep. Hopefully it was a great night. And you built up all these attentional resources, and then slowly they're draining as well throughout the day. So there's all these different forces that act on us to drain our attentional capacity. And so one of the first things people can do is understand when is your peak and when is your valley. And if you understand when your peak is, you can design your day to do tasks and take advantage of that peak. For me personally, my peak is around 11 a.m. We find that people tend to have two peaks, 11 a.m. and mid-afternoon, about 3 p.m. I find that matches my own behavior pretty closely. And so you can plan what you do to optimize the use of your attentional resources.
What's interesting about this, as you lay it out, I start to think, okay, generally speaking, there'd be two types of people. Those people that can control their day and those people whose boss controls their day.
Yes.
You and I might have a lot more flexibility, and I relate to exactly what you're saying. But I guess for someone that has to be at the job at a certain amount of time and certain tasks that the boss asks, that might be different. The follow-up question might be is, how many employers are starting to understand what you just described?
I don't think enough. I don't think this is actually in the thinking of employers. I don't think they realize this idea that people have this limited capacity. I would love for employers to become more aware of this so that they can design work with an eye that each individual should optimize their own attention for the work that they need to do. It's in an employer's interest to do this because they'll get the best possible work out of their employee.
And now we're coming out of a time period, a unique, unnatural time period to where for roughly several years, a significant portion of the workforce around the world was working from home. Without naming names, I've caught some very large names talking about, hey, it's time to come back to work. No more working only at home. How do you see this interesting change that's taken place in the last couple of years?
It's still early to know the effects. I've done some research on work from home to see how it affects people, in particular, how it affects teams. And it's interesting. People who live alone, who have a private space, of course, they do better than people who live in households with other people. In the early pandemic, children had to be at home. They had to do their courses online. Parents, of course, couldn't help but be involved in that. And of course, this impacted their workday as well. If a person has children or, let's say, aging parents or other people in the household, it's a lot harder to keep those borders between work and personal life intact. Those borders start to become very porous. If you think of distractions, the kinds of distractions have changed when people are at home. Looking at that dirty laundry becomes a distraction, or the dirty dishes, as opposed to being in your office and you might have a distraction of a colleague popping into your office. The nature of distractions have changed. And of course, there are mental health concerns for a lot of people who have worked remote in terms of being socially isolated and feeling lonely. There's been a lot of changes that we've been seeing.
I think the most important part of your work to me is the big picture awareness. Many of these topics tied together, it's hard to describe it exactly, but I think when I go through your work, I go through your world, it's the awareness for us to think about these issues, to think about these topics, and not just be caught up in the system where, for example, the media is manipulating us or the AI is manipulating us, and we're not even thinking about it. We're thinking, well, gosh, it's so nice that YouTube seems to magically know what I want to watch next. But then maybe after 2 weeks of watching what YouTube wants you to know next, you start to realize, how come everything feels the same? You start to realize that I'm not an independent actor here. There's other forces that are governing my attention.
I write about this in my book, and I'm really glad that you brought this up because, yes, it's not just the algorithms. There is a tendency to just blame the tech companies and the algorithms that are just becoming more and more sophisticated. And that's true. They absolutely play a role. But there's so many other things going on as well. I write about how the very design of the internet itself, it's designed for distraction because of the node and link structure of the internet maps on so well to how human memory is organized in terms of a semantic network. When you're reading, let's say, Wikipedia, you're primed to click on a link and you travel to another page, and then your mind is racing and making all kinds of connections. You see another link and it primes you. There's this back and forth between being driven by the links that you read on the page and what's going on in your own internal memory. That's one thing. Another example I talked about earlier is we are social beings, and there's all kinds of social forces that play a role in our distraction. People want to accumulate social capital. In other words, we want to accumulate resources that we get from other people. It's about trading in resources. I'll do you a favor, but then I hope in turn you're going to do something for me. I'm going to answer your email because I hope sometime in the future you're going to answer me. And so the internet, it's a marketplace of dealing in this kind of social capital. There's also another thing that people may not realize is there are personality differences. I talked earlier about some people have better self-regulation skills than others. And there's other kinds of personality traits, for example, neuroticism. If a person happens to score high in a personality trait called neuroticism, they are much more likely to be distracted And neuroticism is when people are prone to stress and when you tend to replay events in your mind over and over again. Like, oh, I had that meeting with my colleague. Oh, I should have done it differently. That's a kind of neuroticism at play. Another force on our attention, it's our emotions. When people do rote kinds of activity on the internet, like playing silly games, maybe they're not so silly, but playing simple games, mindless games, it makes people happy. My research showed that people are much happier doing this rote activity on the internet than they are doing focused work where they're using sustained attention. Why is that the case? It's because it's easy. We can get simple rewards from playing games.
Dopamine hit.
Dopamine hit. You watch TikTok, you're going to get rewarded by something that's hilarious. So it keeps us paying attention to these kinds of activities because it makes us happy.
I find those dopamine hits, though, if you were to ask most people about their dopamine hits, if you ask them on a Tuesday about their dopamine hits on Monday, they probably don't remember any of them.
No, they probably wouldn't. They're not processing this kind of material very deeply. It's not like they're trying to learn something or read a difficult book where your mind has to really work to understand it. The last force on our attention that I want to bring up, and it's really an important force, and it's that our short attention spans are reinforced by the broader media world that we live in. It's not just what we do on our computers and phones, but when we watch film or TV, the average duration of shots in film and TV has declined over the years, and it averages about 4 seconds. The way to prove this to yourself is turn on the TV, turn the audio off, and just watch the visual media. And you'll see the shots changing extremely fast. And also music videos. They change shots something like every 2 seconds. And of course, there are constraints on our attention by Twitter with 280 characters and Instagram. Social media also is putting constraints on our attention. It's coming at us from so many different directions.
I might make the argument, as you bring up the shots changing so much, unless we change again as a species, there might be a 30 to 40 year window to where movies were made, let's say 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe 2010s, a few in the last 10 years. But there might be a brief couple decade window where films were made that were watchable. It seems like today, whereas you might take some of the directors from the 70s, the Coppolas and the Scorseses and whatnot, that found this way to have this freedom to do whatever they wanted, whether someone liked it or not, but they would make these stories where today it feels like if I try to turn on a modern film, I feel like I'm watching something that was created in a boardroom full of MBAs that want me to focus on some image for a brief instant. It's completely different. That's going to be interesting to see as time marches on if we go back to perhaps less shots.
It's interesting because I don't think we can go much shorter than 4 seconds. There is this editing technique. It's called chaos editing. If you know the movies from Michael Bay, like the Transformer films, that's an example of chaos editing. It's just your senses are being bombarded.
It's not relaxing at all.
It's not at all relaxing. And if you pull your attention away, let's say to check your phone, you come back to the film and you haven't lost anything in understanding the plot. You've just lost some of the chaos.
I think back to one of the most famous opening scenes ever, which it would have been Marlon Brando petting a cat in his office while his daughter's outside at the wedding. I just don't think anybody in Hollywood would think that that was a valid opening scene today. I think they would all be like, no way. What are you talking about? We can't have this guy just sitting here with this gravelly voice talking like this. We can't start a movie like that. But if I want to watch a movie today, if I say to myself, I want to find a movie, whether the topic is people like it or don't like it or whatever, but just the nature of how that film was made is still interesting to this day compared to if I want to turn on one of the Star Wars movies, the newer Star Wars movies, Like you just said, it doesn't make a difference where you tune in. It's all the same, whatever. However, if I was to go back to the original 1976 first Star Wars, that's still interesting.
I looked at a few films that had sequels, and I see that subsequent sequels have actually shorter scene shots. Scene shots decline over time. It's interesting that you brought up this idea of people sitting in a boardroom who are planning these films to make it very formulaic. It sounds like they're catering to short attention spans. What can we do to create a film that's going to match the short attention spans that people already have?
You do this deep dive. Your career is in this world broadly in general, and specifically with this particular work. You've done all the homework so we can just read and it's easy for us and we don't have to do all the research. There's got to be a side of you that says, though, the trend line is not with me, meaning you see the trend line, the train is out of the station, it's racing ahead. You are trying to get us to pause to observe what's going on. But 10 years from now, where's the train going to be? Where's the trend line going to be?
Oh, gosh, I just hope it's not going to decline further. In the last 5 years, attention spans seem to have reached a steady state of about 47 seconds. However, my graduate student, for her dissertation, she studied 30 knowledge workers for a month, and she tracked their attention spans. She did this through objective means using computer logging, and she found it to be 44 seconds. I fear that attention spans might continue to decline. And as I said, there's so many forces in the environment and in society that are wreaking havoc on our attention spans. It's not just the algorithms, but there's so many other things. You said the train left the station. It's a speeding train that no individual will be able to stop, but rather they just have to get on board and ride with it.
Well, I think what you do is cool, though, is for those people that maybe intuitively feel like something is wrong, you give those people a chance to pause, to assess, to say, how do I want to lead a life? Are there opportunities outside of being in this short attention span world? Am I happier outside of that? So you do a great job. Gloria, the book, Attention Span, Fighting Focus and Fighting Distraction. Where can we send people? Where would you like to direct them beyond Amazon to buy the book and all that fun stuff? Where would you like to send people?
Everybody is welcome to come to my author website, which is gloriamark.com.
Gloria, cool stuff. Please keep me posted on future books. I have a sneaky suspicion you will not stop writing books. And this topic area is something that I find fascinating when people really dive in to find out what's going on with us. Let's hope you make a dent in that trend line.
I hope so.
Gloria, it was good chatting. I appreciate you for coming on.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.